Chapter 10 Intelligence, Modules 29 to 31. Module 29 What is intelligence? Is intelligence one general ability? The Cattell-Horn-Carroll Intelligence Theory. Theories of multiple intelligences. Emotional intelligence. Module 30 Intelligence Assessment and Dynamics. Early and modern tests of mental abilities. Principles of test construction. Extremes of intelligence. Intelligence across the lifespan. Thinking critically about cross-sectional and longitudinal studies. Module 31 Genetic and environmental influences on intelligence. Heredity and intelligence. Environment and intelligence. Gene-environment interactions. Group differences in intelligence test scores. Little Nate's parents never thought he'd excel in the classroom. They were just being realistic. Their son often seemed bored at school. He was never the smart kid. Nate overwhelmingly preferred sports to studying. Eventually, he became a skilled musician, learning how to sing and to play multiple instruments. College wasn't in Nate's plans. He definitely wanted a music career. Then Nate's father suggested, maybe try a year of college. It can't hurt. So, Nate agreed. To fill his course schedule, Nate registered for Introduction to Psychology. The assigned text, an earlier edition of the very book you're reading now, left him abuzz with excitement. I had no idea you could use science to understand people. Although he did not earn an A, Nate learned something that forever changed his life. Hard work and persistence could grow his knowledge. With his new mindset, Nate immersed himself in psychology. He read dozens of psychology books and began to excel in his classes. He gained research experience and attended academic conferences. Nate went on to earn 2 master's degrees and a PhD in psychology and became a professor and one of your authors. Yes, that's correct, Nate, a family nickname, is me Andy. Few topics have sparked more debate than intelligence. Does each of us have an inborn general mental capacity, intelligence? Can we quantify this capacity as a meaningful number? How much does intelligence vary within and between groups, and why? Do beliefs about intelligence, whether it is unchangeable or can grow through experience, influence academic achievement? Modules 29. 31 offer answers, by identifying a variety of mental gifts and concluding that the recipe for high achievement blends talent, grit, and life circumstances. Module 29, What is intelligence? How do psychologists define intelligence? In many studies, intelligence has been defined as whatever intelligence tests measure, which has tended to be school smarts. But intelligence is not a quality like height or weight, which has the same meaning to everyone worldwide. Intelligence describes the qualities that enable people to achieve success in their own time and place. Sternberg and Kaufman, 1998. In Cameroon's equatorial forest, intelligence may reflect understanding the medicinal qualities of local plants. In a North American high school, it may reflect mastering difficult concepts in calculus or chemistry. In both places, intelligence is the ability to learn from experience, solve problems, and use knowledge to adapt to new situations. You probably know some people with talents in science, others who excel in the humanities, and still others gifted in athletics, art, music, or dance. You may also know a talented artist who is stumped by the simplest math problem, or a brilliant math student who struggles when discussing literature. Are all these people intelligent? Could you rate their intelligence on a single scale? Or would you need several different scales? Is intelligence one general ability? LOQ 29-2. What are the arguments for G? Charles Spearman, 1863 to 1945, believed we have one general intelligence, often shortened to G, that is at the heart of all our intelligent behavior, from sailing the sea to sailing through school. He granted that people often have special, outstanding abilities. But he noted that those who score high in one area, such as verbal intelligence, typically score higher than average in other areas, such as spatial or reasoning ability. G is one of the most reliable and valid measures in the behavioral domain, and it predicts important social outcomes such as educational and occupational levels far better than any other trait. Behavior geneticist Robert Plomin, 1999. Spearman's, 1904, belief stemmed in part from his work with factor analysis, a statistical procedure that identifies clusters of related variables. His idea of a general mental capacity expressed by a single intelligence score was controversial in Spearman's day, and so it remains. One of Spearman's early critics was L. L. Thurston, 1887 to 1955. Thurston gave 56 different tests to people and mathematically identified 7 clusters of primary mental abilities: word fluency, verbal comprehension, spatial ability, perceptual speed, numerical ability, inductive reasoning, and memory. Thurston did not rank people on a single scale of general aptitude. But when other investigators studied these profiles, they detected a persistent tendency: those who excelled in one of the 7 clusters generally scored well on the others. So, the investigators concluded, there was still some evidence of a G factor. We might, then, liken mental abilities to physical abilities. Athleticism is not one thing, but many. The ability to run fast is distinct from the eye-hand coordination required to throw a ball on target. Yet there remains some tendency for good things to come packaged together for running speed and throwing accuracy to correlate. So, too, with intelligence. Several distinct abilities tend to cluster together and to correlate enough to define a general intelligence factor. Distinct brain networks enable distinct abilities, with G explained by their coordinated activity. Cole et al., 2015, Kosover et al., 2019. The Cattell-Horn-Carroll Intelligence Theory. LOQ 29-3. How have the concepts of fluid intelligence and crystallized intelligence, and the CHC theory, affected our understanding of intelligence? Raymond Cattell, 1905-1998, and his student, John Horn, 1928-2006, simplified Thurston's primary mental abilities into 2 factors: fluid intelligence, GF, our ability to reason speedily and abstractly, as when solving logic problems, and crystallized intelligence, GC, our accumulated knowledge as reflected in vocabulary and applied skills. Cattell, 1963. A mathematician may use her GF to develop new theories of mathematics. Her GC may be evident in the way she expertly discusses her research when teaching college math classes. Our GF and GC often work together, as when we solve problems by drawing on our accumulated knowledge. The idea of a single intelligence factor, G, received support from hundreds of intelligence studies. But studies also confirm the distinction between fluid and crystallized intelligence, and more specific abilities. Carroll, 1993. The Cattell-Horn-Carroll, CHC, theory brings all of these abilities together in one cumulative framework, affirming a general intellectual ability factor and the existence of GF and GC. And it identifies more specific abilities, such as reading and writing ability, memory capacity, and processing speed. Schneider and McGrew, 2012. The CHC theory remains influential because it recognizes that intelligence comprises many abilities, but that these specific abilities exist under a broader umbrella of general intelligence. This expanded view of intelligence has inspired other psychologists, particularly since the mid-1980s, to extend the definition of intelligence beyond the idea of academic smarts. Kammerer et al., 2020. Theories of multiple intelligences. LOQ 29-4. How do Gardner's and Sternberg's theories of multiple intelligences differ, and what criticisms have they faced? Gardner's multiple intelligences. Howard Gardner has identified 8 relatively independent intelligences, including the verbal and mathematical aptitudes assessed by standardized tests, figure 29.1. Thus, the app developer, the poet, the street-smart adolescent, and the basketball team's playmaking point guard exhibit different kinds of intelligence. Gardner, 1998. Gardner, 1999, has also proposed a 9th possible intelligence: existential intelligence, the ability to ponder large questions about life, death, and existence. Gardner's notion of multiple intelligences continues to influence many educators' belief that children have different learning styles, such as visual and auditory. Newton and Mia, 2017. In one study, 93% of British teachers agreed that individuals learn better when they receive information in their preferred learning style. Decker et al., 2012. Increasingly, however, research casts doubt on the idea of boosting comprehension in this way. Nanskivel et al., 2019, Papadatopostu et al., 2018. Gardner, 1983, 2006, 2011, Davis et al., 2011, views intelligence domains as multiple abilities that come in different packages. Brain damage, for example, may destroy one ability but leave others intact. One man, Dr. P, had damage to a visual brain area. He spoke fluently and could walk a straight line. But his facial recognition ability suffered, causing him to mistake his wife for, of all things, a hat. Sachs, 1985. And consider people with savant syndrome, who have an island of brilliance but often score low on intelligence tests and may have limited or no language ability. Treeford, 2010. Some can compute complicated calculations almost instantly, or identify the day of the week of any given historical date, or render incredible works of art or music. Miller, 1999. The late memory whiz Kim Peek inspired the 1988 movie Rain Man. In 8 to 10 seconds, he could read and remember a page. During his lifetime, he memorized 9,000 books, including Shakespeare's works and the Bible. He could provide GPS-like travel directions within any major U.S. city. Yet he could not button his clothes, and he had little capacity for abstract concepts. Asked by his father at a restaurant to lower his voice, he slid down in his chair to lower his voice box. Asked for Lincoln's Gettysburg address, he responded, 227 Northwest Front Street. But he only stayed there one night. He gave the speech the next day. Treeford and Christensen, 2005. Sternberg's 3 intelligences. Robert Sternberg, 1985, 2015, 2017, agrees with Gardner that there is more to success than academic intelligence and that we have multiple intelligences. But Sternberg's triarchic theory proposes 3, not 8 or 9, reliably measured intelligences. Analytical, academic problem-solving intelligence is assessed by intelligence tests, which present well-defined problems having a single right answer. Such tests predict school grades reasonably well and vocational success more modestly. Creative intelligence is demonstrated in innovative smarts, the ability to adapt to new situations and generate novel ideas. Practical intelligence is required for everyday tasks that may be poorly defined and may have multiple solutions. Gardner and Sternberg agree on 2 important points: multiple abilities can contribute to life success, and differing varieties of giftedness bring both spice to life and challenges for education. Trained to appreciate such variety, many teachers have applied multiple intelligence theories in their classrooms. Ask yourself. The concept of multiple intelligences assumes that the analytical school smarts measured by traditional intelligence tests are important, but that other abilities are also important. Different people have different gifts. What are yours? General intelligence, grit, and deliberate practice. Wouldn't it be nice if the world were so fair that a weakness in one area would be compensated by genius in another? Alas, say scientists, the world is not fair. Brown et al., 2021, Ferguson, 2009. There is a general intelligence factor, G matters, Johnson et al., 2008. It predicts performance on various complex tasks and in various jobs, Gottfredson, 2002 AB, 2003 AB. Studies of nearly 70,000 people from 19 countries find that G predicts higher incomes, Gonzach and Patel, 2018, see also figure 29.2. And extremely high cognitive ability scores predict exceptional achievements, such as doctoral degrees and publications, Kunsel and Hezlet, 2010. Even so, success is not a one-ingredient recipe. Although high academic intelligence will help you get into a profession, via schools and training programs, it alone won't make you successful once there. Success is a combination of talent and grit. Highly successful people tend also to be conscientious and doggedly energetic. I happen to have a talent for allocating capital. But my ability to use that talent is completely dependent on the society I was born into. If I'd been born into a tribe of hunters, I'd probably end up as some wild animal's dinner. Warren Buffett, multi-billionaire stock investor, 2006. For more on how self-disciplined grit feeds achievement, see the What Drives Us modules. Skills that breed success seldom sprout spontaneously. It takes time to cultivate a seedling of talent. K. Anders Ericsson and others proposed a 10-year rule, a common ingredient of expert performance in chess, dance, sports, computer programming, music, and medicine is about 10 years of intense, daily practice, Ericsson and Poole, 2016. Becoming a professional musician, chess player, or elite athlete requires, first, native ability, McNamara et al., 2014, 2016, Vasai et al., 2019. But it also requires years of deliberate practice, about 11,000 hours on average, Campitelli and Gobet, 2011. The recipe for success is a gift of nature plus a whole lot of nurture. Retrieval practice. Answers in Appendix E. Emotional intelligence. LOQ 29-5. What are the four components of emotional intelligence? Social intelligence is the know-how involved in understanding social situations and managing yourself successfully, Cantor and Kielstrom, 1987. Psychologist Edward Thorndike first proposed the concept in 1920, noting that the best mechanic in a factory may fail as a supervisor for lack of social intelligence, Goldman, 2006, p. 83. A critical part of social intelligence, emotional intelligence, consists of four abilities, Meyer et al., 2002, 2012, 2016. Perceiving emotions, recognizing them in faces, music, and stories, and identifying our own emotions. Understanding emotions, predicting them and how they may change and blend. Managing emotions, knowing how to express them in varied situations, and how to handle others' emotions, and using emotions to facilitate adaptive or creative thinking. Emotionally intelligent people are both socially aware and self-aware. They avoid being hijacked by overwhelming depression, anxiety, or anger. They can read others' emotional cues and know what to say to soothe a grieving friend, encourage a workmate, and manage a conflict. They can delay gratification in pursuit of long-range rewards. Thus, emotionally intelligent people tend to succeed in relationship, career, and parenting situations where academically smarter but less emotionally intelligent people may fail. Sheerness, 2010 AB, Charna et al., 2016, Meow et al., 2016. They also tend to be happy and healthy. Sanchez Alvarez et al., 2016, Sarayanandia and Mikolaj 2020. And they do somewhat better academically. Mackan et al., 2020. Aware of these benefits, school-based programs have sought to increase teachers' and students' emotional intelligence. Mahoney et al., 2021. For a summary of these theories of intelligence, see Table 29.1. Retrieval practice. Answers in Appendix E. Review. Module 29, What is intelligence? Learning objectives. Test yourself. Answer these repeated learning objective questions on your own, before showing the answers here, or checking the answers in Appendix D, to improve your retention of the concepts. McDaniel et al., 2009, 2015. Terms and concepts to remember. Test yourself. Write down the definition in your own words, then check your answer. Intelligence. General intelligence, G. Fluid intelligence, GF. Crystallized intelligence, GC. Cattell-Horn-Carroll, CHC, theory. Savant syndrome. Emotional intelligence. Module test. Test yourself. Answer the following questions on your own first, then show the answers here, or check your answers in Appendix E. Module 30, Intelligence Assessment and Dynamics. OC 30-1. What is an intelligence test, and how do achievement tests and aptitude tests differ? An intelligence test assesses people's mental aptitudes and compares them with those of others, using numerical scores. How do psychologists design such tests, and what makes them credible? In your lifetime, you've taken dozens of mental ability tests, school tests of basic reading and math skills, course exams, intelligence tests, driver's license exams. These tests fall under two general categories. Achievement tests, which are intended to reflect what you have learned. Your final exam will measure what you learned in this class. Aptitude tests, which are intended to predict what you will be able to learn. If you took an entrance exam, it was designed to predict your ability to do college or university work. An aptitude test is a thinly disguised intelligence test, says Howard Gardner, 1999. Indeed, report Meredith Frey and Douglas Detterman, 2004, total scores on the US SAT have correlated with general intelligence test scores in a national sample of 14 to 21-year-olds, figure 30.1. Aptitude also supports achievement. People who learn quickly are also better at retaining information, Zaire et al., 2018. Ask yourself, what achievement or aptitude tests have you taken? In your opinion, how well did these tests assess what you'd learned or predict what you were capable of learning? Early and modern tests of mental abilities. LOQ 30-2. When and why were intelligence tests created, and how do today's tests differ from early intelligence tests? Francis Galton, Presuming Hereditary Genius. Western attempts to assess such differences began in earnest with English scientist Francis Galton, 1822–1911, who was fascinated with measuring human traits. When his cousin Charles Darwin proposed that nature selects successful traits through the survival of the fittest, Galton wondered if it might be possible to measure natural ability and to encourage those of high ability to mate with one another. At the 1884 London Health Exhibition, more than 10,000 visitors received his assessment of their intellectual strengths based on such things as reaction time, sensory acuity, muscular power, and body proportions. But alas, on these measures, well-regarded adults and students did not outscore others. Nor did the measures correlate with each other. Although Galton's quest for a simple intelligence measure failed, he gave us some statistical techniques that we still use, as well as the phrase nature and nurture. And his persistent belief in the inheritance of genius reflected in his book, Hereditary Genius, 1869, illustrates an important lesson from both the history of intelligence research and the history of science. Although science itself strives for objectivity, individual scientists are affected by their own assumptions and attitudes. Alfred Binet, Predicting School Achievement. Modern intelligence testing traces its birth to early 20th century France, where a new law required all children to attend school. French officials knew that some children, including many newcomers to Paris, would need special classes. But how could the schools make fair judgments about children's learning potential? Teachers might assess children who had little prior education as slow learners. Or they might sort children into classes by their social backgrounds. To minimize such bias, France's Minister of Public Education gave psychologist Alfred Binet the task of designing fair tests. Binet and his student, Theodore Simon, began by assuming that all children follow the same course of intellectual development but that some develop more rapidly. Nicholas and Levine, 2012. A child with an intellectual developmental disorder should score much like a typical younger child, and an intellectually gifted child like a typical older child. Thus, their goal became measuring each child's mental age, the level of performance typically associated with a certain chronological age. The average 8-year-old, then, has a mental age of 8. An 8-year-old with a below-average mental age, perhaps performing at the level of typical 6-year-old, would struggle with age-appropriate schoolwork. To measure mental age, Binet and Simon theorized that mental aptitude, like athletic aptitude, is a general capacity that shows up in various ways. They tested a variety of reasoning and problem-solving questions on Binet's two daughters, and then on what they called backward and bright Parisian school children. Items answered correctly could then predict how well other French children would handle their schoolwork. Binet and Simon made no assumptions concerning why a particular child was slow, average, or precocious. Binet personally leaned toward an environmental explanation. To raise the capacities of low-scoring children, he recommended mental orthopedics that would help develop their attention span and self-discipline. He believed his intelligence test did not measure inborn intelligence as a scale measures weight. Rather, it had a single practical purpose, to identify French school children needing special attention. Binet hoped his test would be used to improve children's education, but he also feared it would be used to label children and limit their opportunities. Gould, 1981. Retrieval practice. Answers in Appendix E. Louis Terman, Measuring Innate Intelligence. After Binet's death in 1911, others adapted his tests for use as a numerical measure of intelligence. Louis Terman, 1877–1956, was an ambitious Stanford University professor who sought to bring intelligence testing to the United States. At a young age, Terman presumed he wasn't destined for an intellectual life. Terman, 1930. He grew up the 12th of 14 children, the son of farmers who had little education. Terman overcame being burned in a fire, breaking a hip, and tuberculosis. Boring, 1959. His persistence and unquenchable reading appetite led him out of his one-room schoolhouse to a local college and later to Stanford University to study children who, like him, were born with high general intelligence, G. To achieve his goal, Terman tried the Paris-developed questions and age norms with California kids. Adapting some of Binet's original items, adding others, and establishing new age norms, Terman extended the upper end of the test's range from age 12 to superior adults. He also gave his revision the name today's version retains the Stanford Binet. So, how were these intelligence tests scored? The intelligence quotient, IQ, was a formula developed by German psychologist William Stern. The IQ was simply a person's mental age divided by chronological age, multiplied by 100. Thus, the average 8-year-old child, whose mental age and chronological age match, has an IQ of 100. But an 8-year-old who answers questions as would a typical 10-year-old has an IQ of 125. This original IQ formula worked fairly well for children but not for adults. Should a 40-year-old who does as well on the test as an average 20-year-old be assigned an IQ of only 50? Most current intelligence tests, including the Stanford Binet, no longer compute an IQ in this manner, though the term IQ still lingers as a shorthand expression for intelligence test score. Instead, they assign a score that represents a test taker's performance relative to the average performance, arbitrarily set at 100, of others the same age. Most people, about 68% of those taking an intelligence test, fall between 85 and 115. Terman assumed that intelligence tests revealed a mental capacity present from birth. He also assumed that some ethnic groups were naturally more intelligent than others. And he supported eugenics, the discriminatory 19th and 20th century movement that proposed measuring human traits and encouraging only those deemed fit to reproduce as well as preventing those deemed inferior from doing so. With Terman's help, the U.S. government developed new tests to evaluate both newly arriving immigrants and World War I Army recruits, the world's first mass administration of an intelligence test. To some psychologists, the results indicated the inferiority of people not sharing their Anglo-Saxon heritage. Abuses of the early intelligence tests serve to remind us that science can be value-laden. Behind a screen of scientific objectivity, ideology may lurk. Retrieval practice. Answers in Appendix E. David Wexler, Testing Separate Strengths. Psychologist David Wexler created what is now the most widely used individual intelligence test, the Wexler Adult Intelligence Scale, WAIS, together with a version for school-age children, the Wexler Intelligence Scale for Children WISC, and another for preschool children, Evers et al., 2012. The 2008 edition of the WAIS, at the time we were writing this, a new version was anticipated in 2023, consists of 15 subtests, including these. Similarities reasoning, the commonality of two objects or concepts, in what way are wool and cotton alike? Vocabulary naming pictured objects, or defining words, what is a guitar? Block design visual abstract processing, using the 4 blocks, make one just like this. Letter number sequencing on hearing a series of numbers and letters, R2C1M3, repeating the numbers in ascending order, and then the letters in alphabetical order. The WAIS yields not only an overall intelligence score, as does the Stanford Binet, but also separate scores for verbal comprehension, perceptual reasoning, working memory, and processing speed. In such ways, this test helps realize Binet's aim, to identify those who could benefit from special educational opportunities for improvement. Retrieval practice. Answers in Appendix E. Principles of test construction. LOQ 30-3. What is a normal curve, and what does it mean to say that a test has been standardized and is reliable and valid? To be widely accepted, a psychological test must meet 3 criteria: it must be standardized, reliable, and valid. The Stanford Binet and Wexler tests meet these requirements. Standardization. To know how well you performed on an intelligence test, you would need some basis for comparison. That's why test makers give new tests to a representative sample of people. The scores from this pre-tested group become the basis for future comparisons. If you then take the test following the same procedures, your score, when compared with others, will be meaningful. This process is called standardization. For many human attributes, height, weight, and mental aptitude, people's scores typically form a bell-shaped pattern called the bell curve, or normal curve. The curve's highest point is the average score. On an intelligence test, we give this average score a value of 100, figure 30.2. Moving out from the average toward either extreme, we find fewer and fewer people. For both the Stanford-Binet and Wechsler tests, a person's score indicates whether that person's performance fell above or below the average. A score of 130 would indicate that only 2.5% of test takers performed better. About 95% of all people score within 30 points of 100. To keep the average score near 100, the Stanford-Binet and Wechsler scales are periodically restandardized. If you recently took the WACE, 4th edition, your performance was compared with a standardization sample who took the test during 2007, not to David Wechsler's initial 1930s sample. If you compared the performance of the most recent standardization sample with that of the 1930s sample, do you suppose you would find rising or declining test performance? Amazingly, given that college entrance aptitude scores have sometimes dropped, such as during the 1960s and 1970s, intelligence test performance has improved. This worldwide phenomenon is called the Flynn effect, in honor of New Zealand researcher James Flynn, 1987, 2012, 2018, who first calculated its magnitude. Flynn observed that the average person's intelligence test score rose 3 points per decade. Thus, an average person in 1920 would by today's standards score only a 76. Such rising performance has been observed in 49 countries, from Sweden to Sudan. Dutton et al., 2018, Wang Upperaj et al., 2015. Countries that have shown the greatest growth in IQ score over time have also experienced more economic growth. Rinderman and Becker, 2018. Although there have been some regional reversals, the historic increase is now widely accepted as an important phenomenon. Lin, 2009, Teasdale and Owen, 2008. The Flynn effect's cause has been a psychological mystery. Did it result from greater test sophistication? No. Gains appeared before testing was widespread. Perhaps better nutrition? Thanks to improved nutrition, people have gotten taller as well as smarter. But in post-war Britain, noted Flynn, 2009, children in families with lower income gain the most from improved nutrition, yet the intelligence performance gains were greater among children in families with higher income. Might the explanation be greater educational opportunities, smaller families, and rising living standards? Piachnik and Vorosik, 2015, Rinderman et al., 2016? For example, children around the world now have access to educational programs such as Sesame Street that increase their intellectual performance and reduce their prejudice toward children from different ethnic backgrounds. Kwok et al., 2016. Flynn, 2012, attributes the IQ score increases to our need to develop new mental skills to cope with modern environments. Regardless of what combination of factors explains the rise in intelligence test scores, the phenomenon counters one concern of some hereditarians that the higher 20th century birth rates among those with lower scores would shove human intelligence scores downward. Lin and Harvey, 2008. Reliability. Knowing where you stand in comparison to a standardization group still won't say much about your intelligence unless the test has reliability. A reliable test, when retaken, gives consistent scores. To check a test's reliability, researchers test people many times. They may split the test in half, split half, agreement of odd question scores and even question scores, test with alternative forms of the test, or retest with the same test, test-retest. The higher the correlation between the two scores, the higher the test's reliability. The tests we have considered, the Stanford-Binet, the WAIS, and the WISC, are very reliable after early childhood, with correlation coefficients of about. In retests, sometimes decades later, people's scores are generally similar to their first score. Deary et al., 2009, Lyons et al., 2017. Validity. High reliability does not ensure a test's validity, the extent to which the test actually measures or predicts what it promises. Imagine using a tape measure with faulty markings. If you use it to measure people's heights, your results will be very reliable. No matter how many times you measure a person's height, you will get a consistent result. But those results will not be valid. We expect intelligence tests to have predictive validity. They should predict the criterion of future performance, and to some extent they do. In one analysis of 223,000 students from 171 colleges and universities, SAT aptitude scores correlated with first-year college grade point average. Westrick et al., 2019. Higher SAT aptitude scores also predict a greater likelihood of returning for a second year of college. Thus, the SAT has predictive validity of first-year college success and retention. And SAT aptitude scores correlate about with those for the graduate record examination, the GRE, an aptitude test similar to the SAT but for those applying to graduate school. Way et al., 2018. Are general aptitude tests as predictive as they are reliable? No. Aptitude test scores do predict school grades. Roth et al., 2015. But as critics are fond of noting, the predictive power of aptitude tests peaks in the early school years and weakens later. Academic aptitude test scores are reasonably good predictors of school achievement for children ages 6 to 12, where the correlation between intelligence score and school performance is about. Jensen, 1980. Intelligence scores correlate even more closely with scores on later achievement tests. In one comparison of 70,000 English children's intelligence scores at age 11 with their academic achievement in national exams at age 16, Deary et al., 2007, 2009. The SAT, used in the United States as a college entrance exam, has been less successful in predicting first-year college grades. The correlation, less than, has been, however, a bit higher when adjusting for high scorers electing tougher courses. Berry and Sackett, 2009, Willingham et al., 1990. By the time we get to the GRE, the correlation with graduate school performance is an even more modest but still significant. Kunsel and Heslett, 2007. Why does the predictive power of aptitude scores diminish as students move up the educational ladder? Consider a parallel situation. Among all US and Canadian football linemen, body weight correlates with success. A 300-pound player tends to overwhelm a 200-pound opponent. But within the narrow 280 to 320-pound range typically found at the professional level, the correlation between weight and success becomes negligible. Figure 30.3. The narrower the range of weights, the lower the predictive power of body weight becomes. If an elite university takes only those students who have very high aptitude scores, and then gives them a restricted range of high grades, those scores cannot possibly predict much. This will be true even if the test has excellent predictive validity with a more diverse sample of students. Likewise, modern grade inflation has produced less diverse high school grades. With their diminished range, high school grades now predict college grades no better than have SAT scores. Sackett et al., 2012. So, when we validate a measure using a wide range of scores but then use it with a restricted range of scores, it loses much of its predictive validity. Retrieval practice. Answers in Appendix E. Extremes of intelligence. LOQ 30-4. What are the traits of those at the low and high intelligence extremes? One way to glimpse the validity and significance of any test is to compare people who score at the two extremes of the normal curve. The two groups should differ noticeably, and on intelligence tests, they do. The low extreme. Intellectual developmental disorder is a neurodevelopmental disorder that is apparent before age 18, sometimes with a known physical cause. To be diagnosed with an intellectual developmental disorder, a person must, among other criteria, see the psychological disorders modules, have a test score of 70 or below. For some, intelligence test scores can mean life or death. In the United States, one of the only industrialized countries with the death penalty, the Flynn effect means fewer people are now eligible for execution. Why? Because in 2002, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the execution of people with an intellectual developmental disorder is cruel and unusual punishment. For Teresa Lewis, that test score cutoff was 70. Lewis, a dependent personality with limited intellect, a reported intelligence test score of 72, allegedly agreed to a plot in which two men killed her husband and stepson in exchange for a split of a life insurance payout. Ekholm, 2010. The state of Virginia executed Lewis in 2010. If only she had scored 69. In 2014, the U.S. Supreme Court recognized the imprecision and arbitrariness of a fixed cutoff score of 70, and required states with death row inmates who have scored just above 70 to consider other evidence. Thus, Ted Herring, who had scored 72 and 74 on intelligence tests but didn't know that summer follows spring or how to transfer between buses, was taken off Florida's death row. Alvarez and Schwartz, 2014. The high extreme. Children whose intelligence test scores indicate extraordinary academic gifts mostly thrive. In one famous project begun in 1921, Lewis Terman studied more than 1,500 California school children with IQ scores over 135. These high-scoring children, later called the termites, were like those in later studies healthy, well-adjusted, and unusually successful academically. Friedman and Martin, 2012, Lubinsky, 2016. Their success continued over the next 7 decades. Most had attained high levels of education, and many were doctors, lawyers, professors, scientists, and writers. Austin et al., 2002, Holohan and Sears, 1995. Other studies have followed the lives of precocious youths who had aced the math SAT at age 13 by scoring in the top 1% of their age group. By their 50s, these math whizzes had secured 681 patents and many had achieved eminence, often in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math fields. Bernstein et al., 2019, Lubinsky et al., 2014. About 1% of Americans earn doctorates. But for the 12 and 13-year-olds who scored in the top 1 in 10,000 among those of their age taking the SAT, about 40% had done so. Kell et al., 2013, Magel et al., 2016. Among U.S. high-scoring whiz kids were Google co-founder Sergey Brin and musician Stefani Germanotta. Lady Gaga, Kleins, 2016. Schooling and intelligence. Gifted child programs tend to segregate high-scoring children in special classes, often giving them academic enrichment not available to their peers. Remedial programs generally mainstream children, but give them access to resources that help them overcome challenges. Critics note that grouping, tracking, students by aptitude sometimes creates a self-fulfilling prophecy, implicitly labeling some children as ungifted and denying them enrichment opportunities can widen the achievement gap between ability groups. Batruch et al., 2019. Because minority and low-income youth are more often placed in lower academic groups, tracking can also promote segregation and prejudice. Hardly, note critics, a healthy preparation for working and living in a modern world. Critics and proponents of gifted education do, however, agree on this: children have differing gifts, whether at math, verbal reasoning, art, or social leadership. Educating children as if all were alike is as naive as assuming that giftedness is something, like curly hair, that you either have or do not have. One need not stick labels on children to affirm their special talents or their challenges, and to reach them all at the frontiers of their own ability and understanding. By providing appropriate placement suited to each child's talents, as when allowing a math whiz to study math at a higher level, or providing extra resources to children struggling to read, we can promote both equity and excellence for all. Subotnik et al., 2011. Intelligence across the lifespan. What happens to our intellectual muscles as we age? Do they gradually decline, as does our body strength? Or do they remain constant? To see how psychologists have studied intelligence across the lifespan and for an illustration of psychology's self-correcting process, see thinking critically about cross-sectional and longitudinal studies. LOQ 30-5. What are cross-sectional studies and longitudinal studies, and why is it important to know which method was used? Stability or change. LOQ 30-6. How stable are intelligence test scores over the lifespan? What can we predict from a child's early life intelligence scores? Will a precocious 2-year-old mature into a talented college student and a brilliant senior citizen? Maybe or maybe not. For most children, intelligence assessments before age 3 only modestly predict future aptitudes. Humphreys and Davis, 1988, Taspasazan et al., 2003, UET al., 2018. Some precocious preschoolers become brilliant adults, but even Albert Einstein was once thought slow as he was in learning to talk. Quasha, 1980. By age 4, however, children's performance on intelligence tests begins to predict their adolescent and adult scores. The consistency of scores over time increases with the age of the child. Tucker Drop and Briley, 2014. By age 11, the stability becomes impressive, as Ian Deary and his colleagues, 2004, 2009, 2013, discovered when they retested the same cohort, the same group of people over many years. Their amazing longitudinal studies have been enabled by their country, Scotland, doing something no nation has done before or since. On June 1, 1932, essentially every child in the country born in 1921, 87,498 children around age 11 took an intelligence test. The aim was to identify working-class children who would benefit from further education. 65 years later to the day, Deary's colleague Lawrence Whalley and Whalley's wife Patricia scoured the dusty storeroom shelves at the Scottish Council for Research in Education, not far from Deary's Edinburgh University office. At the last possible moment, Patricia uncovered the test results tucked away in a brown paper sack. Carpenter, 2001. "This will change our lives," Deary replied when Whalley told him the news. And so it has, with dozens of studies of the stability and the predictive capacity of these early test results. One of Deary's studies, for example, retested 542 survivors from the 1932 test group now at age 80. The correlation between the two sets of scores after nearly 70 years of varied life experiences was striking. Figure 30.4. Ditto when 106 survivors were retested at age 90, Deary et al., 2013. Another study that followed Scots born in 1936 from ages 11 to 70 confirmed the remarkable stability of intelligence, independent of life circumstance. Johnson et al., 2010. Children and adults who are more intelligent tend to live healthier and longer lives. Kadar et al., 2020, Geary, 2019. High-scoring adolescents, 50 years later, even feel younger than their age. Stefan et al., 2018. Why might this intelligence-health link exist? Deary, 2008, has proposed 4 possible explanations. Intelligence facilitates more education, better jobs, and a healthier environment. Intelligence encourages healthy living, less smoking, better diet, and more exercise. Prenatal events or early childhood illnesses can influence both intelligence and health. A well-wired body, as evidenced by fast reaction speeds, perhaps fosters both intelligence and longevity. Whether you live to collect your old age pension depends in part on your IQ at age 11. Ian Deary, Intelligence, Health, and Death, 2005. Aging and Intelligence. LOQ 30-7. How does aging affect crystallized intelligence, GC, and fluid intelligence, GF? It matters what questions psychological scientists ask, but as we've seen, sometimes it matters even more how they ask them, the research methods they use. Cross-sectional studies had shown that older adults gave fewer correct answers on intelligence tests than did younger adults. These findings caused WACE creator David Wexler, 1972, to conclude that the decline of mental ability with age is part of the general aging process of the organism as a whole. For a long time, this rather dismal view went unchallenged. Many corporations established mandatory retirement policies, assuming the companies would benefit by replacing aging workers with younger, more capable employees. This thinking persists today, with some countries requiring professors to retire by age 60, Hong Kong, or 65, the Netherlands. As everyone knows, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. But after colleges in the 1920s began giving intelligence tests to entering students, psychologists using longitudinal studies, retesting the same cohorts over a period of years, discovered that intelligence remained stable. On some tests, scores even increased, due partly to experience with the tests. Salthouse, 2014, Figure 30.5. Methods matter. The more optimistic results from longitudinal studies challenged the presumption that intelligence sharply declines with age. Famed painter Anna Mary Robertson Moses, Grandma Moses, took up painting in her 70s, and at age 88 a popular magazine named her Young Woman of the Year. At age 89, architect Frank Lloyd Wright designed New York City's Guggenheim Museum. At age 101, neuropsychologist Brenda Milner was still conducting research and supervising students. As everyone knows, given good health, you're never too old to learn. For most people, aging leads to losses and gains. We simultaneously lose recall, memory and processing speed, but gain vocabulary and knowledge. Ackerman, 2014, Tucker Draw et.al., 2019, Figure 30.6. Crystallized intelligence, GC, our accumulated knowledge as reflected in vocabulary and analogies tests increases up to old age. Fluid intelligence, GF, our ability to reason speedily and abstractly, as when solving novel logic problems may decline, but older adults' social reasoning skills increase, as shown by an ability to take multiple perspectives, to appreciate knowledge limits, and to offer helpful wisdom in times of social conflict. Grossman et.al., 2010. Decisions also become less distorted by negative emotions, such as anxiety, depression, and anger. Blanchard Fields, 2007, Carstensen and Michaels, 2005. These lifespan differences in mental abilities help explain why older adults are less likely to embrace new technologies and have more difficulty detecting lies. Brashear and Shatter, 2020, Charnas and Boot, 2009, Pew, 2017. These cognitive differences also help explain why mathematicians and scientists produce much of their most creative work, and chess players' performance peaks during their late 20s or early 30s, when GF is at its highest point. Jones et.al., 2014, Stridmatter et.al., 2020. In contrast, authors, historians, and philosophers tend to produce their best work in their 40s, 50s, and beyond after building their GC, or accumulated knowledge. Simonton, 1988, 1990. Knowledge is knowing a tomato is a fruit, wisdom is not putting it in a fruit salad. Anonymous. Retrieval practice. Answers in Appendix E. Review. Module 30, Intelligence Assessment and Dynamics. Learning Objectives. Test yourself. Answer these repeated learning objective questions on your own, before showing the answers here, or checking the answers in Appendix D, to improve your retention of the concepts. McDaniel et al., 2009, 2015. Terms and concepts to remember. Test yourself. Write down the definition in your own words, then check your answer. Intelligence test. Achievement test. Aptitude test. Mental age. Stanford Binet. Intelligence quotient, IQ. Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale, WAIS. Standardization. Normal curve. Reliability. Validity. Predictive validity. Cross-sectional study. Longitudinal study. Cohort. Module test. Test yourself. Answer the following questions on your own first, then show the answers here, or check your answers in Appendix E. Module 31, Genetic and Environmental Influences on Intelligence. Intelligence runs in families. But why? Are our intellectual abilities mostly inherited? Or are they molded by our environment? Heredity and intelligence. LOQ 31-1. What is heritability, and what do twin and adoption studies tell us about the nature and nurture of intelligence? Heritability is the portion of variation among individuals in a group that we can attribute to genes. Estimates of the heritability of intelligence. The extent to which intelligence tests score variation within a group can be attributed to genetic variation range from 50% to 80%, Madison et al., 2016, Plomin et al., 2016, Plomin and von Stumm, 2018. Does this mean that we can assume that 50% to 80% of your intelligence is due to your genes, and the rest to your environment? No. Heritability never applies to an individual, only to why people in a group differ from one another. Identical twins share the same genes. Do they also share mental abilities? As you can see from Figure 31.1, which summarizes many studies, the answer is clearly yes. Even when adopted by two different families, their intelligence test scores are very similar. When raised together, their scores are nearly as similar as those of the same person taking the same test twice. Hayworth et al., 2009, Leakin, 2006, Plomin et al., 2016. Identical twins also exhibit substantial similarity and heritability in specific talents, such as music, math, and sports. Are there known genes for genius? When 100 researchers pooled their data on 269,867 people, all of the gene variations analyzed accounted for only about 5% of the differences in educational achievement. Savage et al., 2018. Another analysis of genes from 1.1 million people accounted for about 12% of their educational attainment differences. J. Lee et al., 2018. Like height, which is predicted by nearly 10,000 known DNA sequences, intelligence is polygenic, involving many genes. Kaiser, 2020. What matters for intelligence, as for height, personality, sexual orientation, or just about any human trait, as well as for disorders such as schizophrenia, is the combination of many genes. Environment and intelligence. Fraternal twins are genetically no more alike than other biological siblings, but they usually share an environment and are often treated similarly. Their intelligence test scores are also more alike than are the scores of non-twin siblings. See Figure 31.1. So, environment does have some effect. Adoption studies help us assess the influence of environment. Seeking to untangle genes and environment, researchers have also compared the intelligence test scores of adopted children with those of a. their biological parents, who provided their genes, b. adoptive parents, who provided their home environment, and c. adoptive siblings, who shared that home environment. Several studies suggest that a shared environment exerts a modest influence on intelligence test scores. Adoption from poverty into financially secure homes enhances children's intelligence test scores, Nisbet et al., 2012. One large Swedish study looked at this effect among children adopted into wealthier families with more educated parents. The adopted children's IQ scores were higher, by an average of 4.4 points, than those of their non-adopted biological siblings, Kendler et al., 2015. Adoption of mistreated or neglected children enhances their intelligence scores, Almas et al., 2017. The intelligence scores of virtual twins same age, unrelated children adopted as infants and raised together as siblings correlate positively. Siegel et al., 2012. During childhood, adoptive siblings' test scores correlate modestly. Over time, adopted children accumulate experience in their differing adoptive families. So, would you expect the shared environment effect to grow with age and the genetic legacy effect to shrink? If you would, behavior geneticists have a stunning surprise for you. Adopted children's intelligence scores resemble those of their biological parents much more than those of their adoptive parents, Leyland, 2016. And over time, adopted children's verbal ability scores become more like those of their biological parents, Figure 31.2. Mental ability similarities between adopted children and their adoptive families wane with age, McHugh et al., 1993. Who would have guessed? Genetic influences become more apparent as we accumulate life experience. Identical twin similarities, for example, continue or increase into their 80s. In one massive study of 11,000 twin pairs in 4 countries, the heritability of general intelligence, G, increased from 41% in middle childhood to 55% in adolescence to 66% in young adulthood, Hayworth et al., 2010. Thus, report Ian Deary and his colleagues, 2009-2012, the heritability of general intelligence increases from about 30% in early childhood to well over 50% in adulthood. For a helpful tutorial animation, watch this video, Twin Studies. Retrieval Practice. Answers in Appendix E. Gene, Environment Interactions. LOQ 31-2. How can environmental influences affect cognitive development? Genes and experience together weave the fabric of intelligence. Epigenetics studies part of the dynamic biology of this nature-nurture meeting place. With all our abilities, whether mental or physical, our genes shape the experiences that shape us. If you have a natural aptitude for dance, you will probably perform more often than others, getting more practice, instruction, and experience. Or, if you have a natural aptitude for academics, you will more likely stay in school, read books, and ask questions, all of which will increase your brain power. The same would be true for your identical twin, who might, not just for genetic reasons, also become a star performer. In these gene-environment interactions, small genetic advantages can trigger social experiences that multiply our original skills, Cheeseman et al., 2020, Sauce and Motzel, 2018. Sometimes, however, environmental conditions work in reverse, depressing physical or cognitive development. Severe deprivation leaves footprints on the human brain. Nowhere is the intertwining of biology and experience more apparent than in the most hopeless human environments, such as J. McVicker Hunt, 1982, observed in a destitute Iranian orphanage. The typical child Hunt observed there could not sit up unassisted at age 2 or walk at age 4. The minimal care infants received was not in response to their crying, cooing, or other behaviors, so the children developed little sense of personal control over their environment. Extreme deprivation had crushed their native intelligence, a finding confirmed by other studies of children raised in poorly run orphanages in Romania and elsewhere. Nelson et al., 2009, 2013, Van I. J. Zendorn et al., 2008. Aware of both the dramatic effects of early experiences and the impact of early intervention, Hunt began a training program for the Iranian caregivers, teaching them to play language fostering games with 11 infants. They imitated the babies' babbling, engaged them in vocal follow the leader, and, finally, they taught the infants sounds from the Persian language. The results were dramatic. By 22 months of age, the infants could name more than 50 objects and body parts, and so charmed visitors that most were adopted, an unprecedented success for the orphanage. Hunt's findings are an extreme case of a more general finding: the poor environmental conditions that accompany poverty can depress cognitive development. Heberle and Carter, 2015, Turk, 2005. The environment's influence was strikingly apparent after psychologist Harold Skeels in 1934 did an IQ assessment of 2 toddler girls at an Iowa orphanage, where they were scarcely touched, never held, rarely spoken to. Brookwood, 2021. With IQ scores below 50, both toddlers were deemed ineligible for adoption, and placed in an institution for the feeble-minded to be cared for by adult women with mental ages of only 5 to 9 years. The women lavished their new foster children with affection. When Skeels returned 9 months later, he was amazed to find the girls alert, attractive, and playful. After nearly 2 years with their new caregivers, their IQs had risen to 95 and 93. By their late 20s, both were married and with children in loving households. Nurture matters. People's worries and distractions can also consume cognitive bandwidth and diminish thinking capacity. On tests of cognitive functioning, sugarcane farmers in India scored better after being paid for their harvest when their money worries dropped. Mani et al., 2013. If extreme conditions, sensory deprivation, social isolation, poverty can slow brain development, could the reverse also be true? Could an enriched environment amplify development and give very young children a superior intellect? Most experts doubt it. Deloach et al., 2010, Reichert et al., 2010, Vance, 2018. There is no environmental recipe for fast-forwarding a normal infant into a genius. All babies should have normal exposure to sights, sounds, and speech. Beyond that, Sandra Scars, 1984, verdict still is widely shared: parents who are very concerned about providing special educational lessons for their babies are wasting their time. More encouraging results have come from intensive, post-babyhood enrichment programs. Dodge et al., 2017, Sasser et al., 2017, Tucker Drob, 2012. This is particularly true of preschool programs for children living in poverty. Gormley et al., 2013, Heckman and Karapakula, 2019, Magnuson et al., 2007. Intelligence scores also rise with nutritional supplements for pregnant people and newborns, 3.5 points, with quality preschool experiences, 4 points, and with interactive reading programs, 6 points. Protzko et al., 2013. Growth mindset. Schooling and intelligence interact, and both enhance later income. Ceci and Williams, 1997, 2009. But what we accomplish with our intelligence depends also on our own beliefs and motivation. One analysis of 72,431 undergraduates found that study motivation and study skills rivaled aptitude and previous grades as predictors of academic achievement, Creed and Kunsel, 2008. Even intelligence test performance can be affected by motivation. 4 dozen studies show that, when promised money for doing well, adolescents score higher on such tests, Duckworth et al., 2011. These observations would not surprise psychologist Carol Dweck, 2018, Dweck and Yeager, 2019. She reports that believing intelligence is changeable fosters a growth mindset, a focus on learning and growing. Conversely, believing that intelligence is innately fixed fosters less optimism about people's capacity for change and growth, Tao et al., 2021. Teachers who adopt a growth mindset tend to view their schools as more likely to improve, Rechsteiner et al., 2021. Researcher Gregory Walden, 2020, teaches a growth mindset to his young children when they tire while biking home. It's when you're tired and you keep going that your muscles get stronger. Dweck likewise teaches young teens that the brain is like a muscle, growing stronger with use as neuron connections grow. Learning how to do a new kind of problem grows your math brain. Receiving praise for effort and for tackling challenges, rather than for being smart or accomplished, helps teens understand the link between hard work and success, Gunderson et al., 2013. A growth mindset doesn't alter inborn intelligence, so its benefits should not be overstated or lead children to blame themselves for their struggles. But it can make children and youth more resilient when confronted with difficult learning material or frustrating people, Peng and Tullis, 2020, Walton and Wilson, 2018. One national experiment with 6,320 lower-achieving U.S. high school students showed that viewing 2 25-minute videos fostering a growth mindset modestly improved grades, Yeager et al., 2019. Mindset is only part of the story, but it does matter. More than 300 studies confirm that ability plus opportunity plus motivation equals success in fields from sports to science to music, Erickson et al., 2007. Extremely high intelligence test scoring 12-year-olds are much more likely than the average person to earn doctorates and hold patents if their ability is coupled with commitment, Magel et al., 2016. High school students' math proficiency and college students' grades reflect their aptitude but also their self-discipline, their belief in the power of effort, and a curious, hungry mind, Murayama et al., 2013, Richardson et al., 2012, von Stumm et al., 2011. Consider Zyla Avant-Garde, who in 2021 became the first African American winner of the U.S. National Spelling Bee contest. For 2 years, she studied tens of thousands of words with her father and participated in 18 spelling competitions. Not only is she America's best speller, Avant-Garde also holds 3 world records for basketball dribbling, Kramer and Uhas, 2021. Zyla Avant-Garde shows us how to realize our potential, believe in your ability to learn, and apply yourself with sustained effort. When you fail, embrace it, learn from it. Don't think, that's going to hinder you from becoming whoever you want to become. I wake up every day telling the world, come on baby, let's ride. What you got for me? Recording artist Pitbull, 2019. These repeated findings that a growth mindset and disciplined effort enhance achievement have generated attention. Applying growth mindset findings in large-scale interventions with at-risk students can have a downside, the social cost of blaming struggling individuals for their circumstances, Eikaiser and Blanton, 2016. And researchers and educators sometimes overstate the modest growth mindset benefit, Burgoyne et al., 2020. Overemphasizing growth mindset power can, as with the motivational concept of grit, leave some students feeling that their disappointments reflect a moral flaw. Sometimes people need more than the power of positive thinking to overcome their harsh conditions. Ask yourself, are you working to the potential reflected in your standardized aptitude test scores? What, other than your aptitude, is affecting your school performance? Group differences in intelligence test scores. If there were no group differences in intelligence test scores, psychologists would have less debate over hereditary and environmental influences. But there are group differences. What are they? And what shall we make of them? Gender similarities and differences. LOQ 31-3. How and why do the genders differ in mental ability scores? In science, as in everyday life, it is differences not similarities that excite interest. Men's self-estimated intelligence is often higher than women's self-estimated intelligence, which may fuel a false perception that men are smarter than women. Fernham, 2016. In truth, men's and women's intelligence differences are minor. For example, in that 1932 testing of all Scottish 11-year-olds, boys' intelligence scores averaged 100.5 and girls' 100.6, Deary et al., 2003. As far as G is concerned, the genders are the same. Yet most people find differences more newsworthy. In cultures where both girls and boys are educated, girls tend to outpace boys in spelling, verbal fluency, and reading skills that may affect their career choices, some researchers suspect. Breda and Knapp, 2019, Riley et al., 2019. They are better emotion detectors and are more sensitive to touch, taste, and color. Halpern et al., 2007. Testosterone therapy for those transitioning from female to male results in brain-language processing areas that become more male-like, as well as some gray matter loss. Hahn et al., 2016. In math computation and overall math performance, girls and boys hardly differ. Elsquest et al., 2010, Hyde and Mertz, 2009, Lindbergh et al., 2010. On complex math problems, men outperform women. But the most reliable male edge appears in spatial ability tests like the one shown in Figure 31.3, Lauer et al., 2019. The solution requires speedy mental rotation of three-dimensional objects. Male mental ability scores, and brains, also vary more. Warenga et al., 2022. Worldwide, boys and men outnumber girls and women at both the low and high extremes. Ball et al., 2017, Bay and Mansour, 2016. Boys, for example, are more likely than girls to need remedial math classes. But they are also more likely to earn the highest math scores. Psychologist Steven Pinker, 2005, has argued for the evolutionary perspective that biology affects gender differences in life priorities, women's somewhat greater interest in people versus men's in money and things, in risk-taking, with men more reckless, and in math reasoning and spatial abilities. Such differences are, he noted, observed across cultures, stable over time, influenced by prenatal hormones, and observed in boys raised as girls. But social expectations and opportunities also construct gender by shaping interests and abilities. Zhang et al., 2020. Stephen Ceci and Wendy Williams, 2010-2011, reported that culturally influenced preferences help explain why U.S. women, more than men, avoid math-intensive vocations. In Asia and Russia, teen girls have outperformed boys in an international science exam. In North America and Britain, boys have scored higher. Fairfield, 2012. More gender-equal cultures, such as Sweden and Iceland, exhibit little of the gender math gap found in gender-unequal cultures, such as Turkey and Korea. Gaiso et al., 2008, Kane and Mertz, 2012. Since the 1970s, as gender equity has increased in the United States, the boy-to-girl ratio among 12 to 14-year-olds with very high SAT math scores, above 700, has declined from 13 to 1 to 3 to 1, Makel et al., 2016, Nisbet et al., 2012. And in psychology, there's been a dramatic change in the ratio of women to men earning doctorates from 17% women in 1958 to 71% in 2018, Virelli, 2008, NSF, 2019. As we have seen in so many areas of life, cultural expectations and opportunities matter. Racial and ethnic similarities and differences. LOQ 31-4. How and why do racial and ethnic groups differ in mental ability scores? Fueling the group differences debate are two other disturbing but scientifically agreed upon facts. Racial and ethnic groups differ in their average intelligence test scores. High-scoring people, and groups, are more likely to attain high levels of education and income. There are many group differences in average intelligence test scores. New Zealanders of European descent outscore native Maori New Zealanders. Israeli Jews outscore Israeli Arabs. Most Japanese outscore most Burakumin, a stigmatized Japanese minority. And white Americans have outscored black Americans, although this difference has diminished, especially among children, Dickens and Flynn, 2006, Nisbet et al., 2012. Such group differences provide little basis for judging individuals. Worldwide, women outlive men by 5 years, but knowing only an individual's gender won't tell us how long that person will live. We have seen that heredity contributes to individual differences in intelligence. But group differences in a heritable trait may be entirely environmental. Consider one of nature's experiments: allow some children to grow up hearing their culture's dominant language, while others, born deaf, do not. Then give both groups an intelligence test rooted in the dominant language. The result? No surprise, those with expertise in the dominant language will score higher than those who were born deaf. Braden, 1994, Steele, 1990, Zeidner, 1990. Might the racial and ethnic gap be similarly environmental? Consider. Genetics research reveals that under the skin, we humans are remarkably alike. Despite some racial variation, such as in health risks, the average genetic difference between two Icelandic villagers or between two Kenyans greatly exceeds the average group difference between Icelanders and Kenyans. Cavalli Sforza et al., 1994, Rosenberg et al., 2002. Moreover, looks can deceive. Light-skinned Europeans and dark-skinned Africans are genetically closer than are dark-skinned Africans and dark-skinned Aboriginal Australians. Race is not a neatly defined biological category. Race is primarily a social construction without well-defined physical boundaries. Each race blends seamlessly into the race of its geographical neighbors. Helms et al., 2005, Smedley and Smedley, 2005. In one genetic analysis of more than 160,000 people living in the United States, most with less than 28% African ancestry said they were white, those with more than 28% mostly said they were African American. BYRC et al., 2015. Moreover, with increasingly mixed ancestries, more and more people defy neat racial categorization and self-identify as multiracial. Parker et al., 2009. Within the same populations, there are generation-to-generation differences in test scores. Test scores of today's better-fed, better-educated, and more test-prepared populations exceed those of 1930s populations by a greater margin than the score difference between today's average-scoring Black Americans and average-scoring White Americans. Flynn, 2012, Piachnig and Voracek, 2015, Trahan et al., 2014. The average intelligence test performance of today's sub-Saharan Africans is the same as that of British adults in 1948, Wichards et al., 2010. No one credits genetics for such generation-to-generation differences. Schools and culture matter. Countries whose economies create a large wealth gap between rich and poor tend also to have a large rich versus poor intelligence test score gap, Nisbet, 2009. In the United States, rising income inequality has meant less equal access to a college education, Jackson and Halsman, 2020. And fewer educational opportunities can result in lower intelligence test scores. One analysis of 600,000 students showed that each additional year of school predicted 1 to 5 additional IQ points, Ritchie and Tucker Drob, 2018. Starting and staying in school secures superior smarts. Math achievement, aptitude test differences, and especially grades may reflect conscientiousness more than competence, Poropet, 2014. Women in college and university outperform equally able men, thanks partly to their greater conscientiousness, Kaiser et al., 2016. Students in Asia, who have largely outperformed North American students on such tests, have also spent more time in school and much more time studying in and out of school, CMEC, 2018, Larson and Verma, 1999, NCEE, 2018. These differences persist within the United States, where Asian American students devote the most time to studying and earn the highest grades, HSIN and SIA, 2014. In different eras, different ethnic groups have experienced golden ages periods of remarkable achievement. 2,500 years ago, it was the Greeks and the Egyptians, then the Romans. In the 8th and 9th centuries, genius seemed to reside in the Arab world, leading one Muslim scholar of the era to say of the English and the Dutch, they lack keenness of understanding and clarity of intelligence and are overcome by ignorance and apathy, lack of discernment, and stupidity, Henrik, 2020. 500 years ago, the Aztec Indians and the peoples of Northern Europe were the superachievers. While the gene pool remained relatively stable, cultures rose and fell. Do not obtain your slaves from Britain, because they are so stupid and so utterly incapable of being taught. Cicero, 106-43 BCE. Consider cultural effects on test scores in this video. Can cultural proficiency among teachers help close the student achievement gap? Retrieval practice. Answers in Appendix E. The question of bias. LOQ 31-5. Are intelligence tests biased or unfair? What is stereotype threat, and how does it affect test takers' performance? Knowing there are group differences in intelligence test scores leads to the question of whether those differences are built into the tests. Are intelligence tests biased? The answer depends on how we define bias. The scientific meaning of bias hinges solely on whether a test predicts future behavior for all groups of test takers, not just for some. For example, if the SAT accurately predicted the college achievement of women but not that of men, then the test would be biased. In this scientific meaning of the term, the near consensus among psychologists, as summarized by the U.S. National Research Council's Committee on Ability Testing and the American Psychological Association's Task Force on Intelligence, has been that the major U.S. aptitude tests are not biased. Berry and Zhao, 2015, Neisser et al., 1996, Wigner and Garner, 1982. The test's predictive validity is roughly the same, regardless of gender, race, ethnicity, or socioeconomic level. If an intelligence test score of 95 predicts slightly below average grades, that rough prediction usually applies equally to all. But in everyday language, we sometimes use the word bias to describe things that are unfair. For example, if scores will be influenced by the test taker's cultural or life experiences, then intelligence tests may be considered unfair, even if scientifically unbiased. Why? Because they measure the test takers' developed abilities, which reflect, in part, their education and experiences. Being able to answer "Who wrote Hamlet" relies more on educational exposure than on innate intellectual ability. Zoreff and Williams, 1980. Some researchers, therefore, recommend culture-neutral questions such as those that assess people's ability to learn novel words, sayings, and analogies to enable culture-fair aptitude tests. Fagan and Holland, 2007, 2009. Today's standardized tests are rigorously reviewed to attempt to eliminate cultural bias. Testing proponents caution us against blaming tests for exposing unequal experiences and opportunities. If, because of malnutrition, people were to suffer stunted growth, should we blame the measuring stick that reveals it? If unequal past experiences predict unequal future achievements, a valid aptitude test will detect such inequalities. Retrieval practice. Answers in Appendix E. Test takers' expectations. Throughout this text, you have seen that expectations and attitudes can influence our perceptions and behaviors. For test makers, expectations can introduce bias. For test takers, they can become self-fulfilling prophecies. In one study, equally capable men and women took a difficult math test. The women did not do as well as the men except when they were led to expect that women usually do as well as men on the test. Spencer et al., 1999. Otherwise, something affected their performance, leading the women to confirm societal expectations that they would not perform as well as the men. There was a threat in the air. Spencer et al., 2016. This self-fulfilling stereotype threat appeared again when black students who were reminded of their race just before taking verbal aptitude tests performed worse than those who hadn't been reminded. Steele et al., 2002. Such studies suggest that negative stereotypes may undermine people's academic and professional potential. Grand, 2016, Nguyen and Ryan, 2008, Walton and Spencer, 2009. If you worry that your group or type often doesn't do well on a certain kind of test or task, your self-doubts and self-monitoring may hijack your working memory and impair attention, performance, and learning. Hutchison et al., 2013, Inslicht and Kong, 2010, Rydell et al., 2010. Critics argue that stereotype threat effects are weaker than originally thought. Floor and Wichards, 2015, Floor et al., 2019. Math class is tough. Teen Talk Talking Barbie Doll, introduced July 1992, recalled 3 months later. Stereotype threat, like growth mindset and grit, is a modest phenomenon that often gets overstated. Floor et al., 2019. Yet it helps explain why Black Americans have scored higher when test administrators were black than when test administrators were white. Danso and Esses, 2001. It gives us insight into why women have scored higher on math tests when there are no test takers who are men present. Doyle and Voyer, 2016. Avoiding the presence of others who are expected to perform better can give you the confidence to do your best. From such studies, some researchers have concluded that making students believe they probably won't succeed, an unintended effect of some remedial programs, can function as a stereotype and weaken performance. Steele, 1995, 2010. Other research teams have demonstrated the benefits of self-affirmation exercises that engage students in writing about their most important values. Borman et al., 2019, Ferrer and Cohen, 2018, Logel et al., 2019. When challenged to believe in their potential, think positively about their diverse life experiences, or increase their sense of belonging, disadvantaged university students have earned higher grades and have had lower dropout rates. Benning et al., 2020, Broda et al., 2018, Townsend et al., 2019. Einstein showed that genius equals brains plus tenacity squared. Walter Isaacson, Einstein's Final Quest, 2009. Perhaps, then, our goals for tests of mental abilities should be threefold. First, we should realize the benefits that intelligence testing pioneer Alfred Binet foresaw to enable schools to recognize who might profit most from early intervention. Second, we must remain alert to Binet's wish that intelligence test scores not be misinterpreted as literal measures of a person's worth and potential. Third, we must remember that the competence that general intelligence tests sample is important. It helps enable success in some life paths. But these tests reflect only one important aspect of personal competence, Stanovich et al., 2016. Our rationality, practical intelligence, and emotional intelligence matter, too, as do other forms of creativity, talent, and character. Almost all the joyful things of life are outside the measure of IQ tests. Madeleine L. Engel, A Circle of Quiet, 1972. The point to remember, there are many ways of being successful, our differences are variations of human adaptability. Life's great achievements result not only from can-do abilities and fair opportunity but also from will-do motivation. Competence plus opportunity plus diligence equals accomplishment. Retrieval practice. Answers in Appendix E. Review. Module 31, Genetic and Environmental Influences on Intelligence. Learning objectives. Test yourself. Answer these repeated learning objective questions on your own, before showing the answers here, or checking the answers in Appendix D, to improve your retention of the concepts. McDaniel et al., 2009, 2015. Terms and concepts to remember. Test yourself. Write down the definition in your own words, then check your answer. Heritability. Growth mindset. Stereotype threat. Module test. Test yourself. Answer the following questions on your own first, then show the answers here, or check your answers in Appendix E. Chapter 11,